Chapter 15. The hospital was quiet. The murmur of voices and machines drifted through the open door of the single-bed room. The air-conditioned unit hummed on the wall near the ceiling, pumping cool air into the windowless room. The place reeked of disinfectant and disease. It was almost as if no amount of scrubbing and chemicals could scrape away the scent of death and dying that had seeped into the very walls of this place. All hospitals were the same. Steele could recall the one his mother spent her last months in as she died. He had hated visiting her, not because he didn't want to spend time with his mother before she died, but because of the hospital. Hospitals were supposed to be places where people sought treatment to cure their ills, but it was instead a place where people went to die. He had been forced to spend time in hospital a few times, when he had been involved in a vehicle accident on the mainland and he had to spend a week in one. It was not just the environment he hated, but the mentality of those who lingered here. If he asked a patient, they would say they were sick or receiving treatment, meaning they were comfortable needing to be in a hospital, almost like they wanted to be sick or dying. Most people did not even realize that they thought that way, and some even enjoyed being there so they could feel wanted for and cared for. It was the same for the need of prescriptions. So long as you supposedly need a prescription, you're relying on the fact that you're ill. Prescriptions perpetuate illness, just like hospitals perpetuate sickness. Steele sighed heavily, trying not to think about it too much, his gaze drifting to Knox, who slept in a small bed. Although Reeves had told him Knox was awake, when Steele arrived his friend had been sleeping, and was still sleeping. The nurse that had come to check on Knox informed Steele that he'd been awake not long before he arrived, and had been questioned for a few hours by the police. Steele had considered leaving when he noticed Knox was asleep, just as he considered waking his friend. But he had done neither, and simply sat down on the visitor's chair beside the cot and put his feet up on the end of the bed. He still had things to do before the night of the arms deal, like reconnaissance of the warehouse, but the day was growing late and the meeting with Jimmy and Benedict earlier was still playing on his mind. Staring absently at the blank wall, Steele placed his hands in his lap and slowly twiddled his thumbs. The meeting with Benedict continued to stay in his mind, for the man had virtually everything Steele desired. It was not the man's power or status that Steele wanted, but rather the ability to do whatever he wanted. It was Benedict's wealth that gave him such a carefree attitude. But it was also clear from the meeting that the company board member worked effectively and efficiently. If Benedict wanted, he could simply leave the company any time and live the rest of his life on one of the islands in Targo Atoll, just offshore from Westside. Benedict could easily spend upwards of $50,000 every month and still make more money than he spent. That kind of ability allowed a man to sever himself from the bindings of society. That was the kind of freedom Steele had always wanted. But something had unsettled him when he met Benedict. It was not the man's presence or the air of superiority that he had carried with him. Rather, it was something else. Steele could see himself in Benedict's very position, practicing his martial arts and ordering about subordinates in between massages with beautiful women. It had been like he was looking into a mirror, and he had not necessarily liked the reflection it displayed. A deep frown came to Steele's face. Benedict had what he wanted, and now that he could see himself in that position, he did not really like what it suggested. But if that was not what he really wanted, what did he desire? Steele sighed again and rubbed his face with his hands. Glancing at the clock on the wall, he noticed that he had been sitting there for almost an hour. His stomach grumbled slightly, reminding him that it was probably time for some food. So with another look to his sleeping friend, Steele moved to get up and leave the hospital. He would return when Knox was actually awake. Before he got to his feet, though, Knox stirred and slowly woke up, looking to the blank ceiling first, his expression blank, and his eyes focused on Steele and a smile came to his face. "Reinhardt?" Knox exclaimed in surprise, his sleep fully leaving him. "How long have you been here? You should have woken me." "It doesn't matter," Steele shrugged, noticing a smile had come to his face as well. "You're awake now, so how are you feeling?" "Not like I've been stabbed half a dozen times." Knox laughed slightly and winced in pain as he tried to sit up. With a sigh, Knox stopped trying and instead used a small remote by his hand to move the bed. Electric gears in the cot groaned slightly as the mattress bent and lifted Knox into a seating position. "I should have done something," Steele said quietly, a flicker of frown coming to his face. "Like what?" Knox asked back. Don't worry about it, man. Frankie's a drugged-addled psycho. Even if you were Master Jun, you couldn't have stopped him before he stabbed me. Perhaps if I had kept up my training, I could have stopped him after only a few stabs, Steele replied seriously, instead of standing there like an idiot. Don't worry about it, Knox dismissed the concern. I'm alive, and one of the cute nurses here said she'll give me a sponge bath later. I guess that's one good thing about nearly dying, Steele agreed with a slight laugh. The food is terrible, though, Knox continued thoughtfully. You'll have to smuggle me in some meals from Auntie Poe's kitchen. I doubt that would be any better, Steele said dryly, causing Knox to laugh and then groan as he grabbed his gut. No laughing, Knox said with a wince. I heard Reeves came by, Steele remarked, changing the topic. Yeah, he pummeled me with a few questions for an hour, Knox nodded. Not that they needed my statement, though. I hear Frankie is all but convicted from the evidence. Jimmy must not be too happy about that, though. Quite the opposite, I think, Steele said with a shrug, once again resting back in his chair and putting his feet up on the end of Knox's bed. You remember how Frankie was in high school. Imagine having to deal with that all the time. I think he's gotten worse since then, too. My gut would agree, Knox smirked before letting out a deep breath. I guess this means I'll miss out on the fun of the arms deal. How'd you go with Clara? I had to improvise a little bit, Steele replied honestly. But I think things are working well at the moment. So we got Reuven sorted and Clara and Jimmy, Knox said, listing the names on his fingers. Plus your contingency plan, which I still don't see happening. So what else? The probability of it happening is quite high, Knox, Steele replied seriously. But anyway, we'll deal with that when it arises, and you might need to do a few things even though you're injured. I'll help out if you need me to, Knox said with a determined look on his eye. I know, Steele said with a smile. Farron might be a problem, though. What? Knox seemed genuinely surprised. Why? She's reckless and impulsive, Steele said, a frown coming to his face. She'll be fine, Knox reassured him. So, what's your next move? I still need to check out the warehouse, Steele replied, turning his eyes towards the ceiling thoughtfully, and the car. Then there's Sovereign. Sovereign? Knox wondered curiously. I need to know more about them, Steele replied, his eyes still to the ceiling and the harsh fluorescent light. Good luck with that, Knox remarked. Even I don't know much about them. Some of your lady friends might, though, Steele said, more to himself than Knox. Really? Knox wondered as he pondered the thought. Well, I suppose a couple of them might, but that's a pretty thin chance. Do you think you could do a little digging for me? Steele asked seriously, turning his attention to his friend, his eyes narrowing slightly. Pretend you can't pay the hospital bills or something and ask for help. A hesitant look came to Knox's eyes, but he nodded his head slightly. I suppose I could, Knox replied, his demeanour changing slightly, as a sly smile came to his face. I know I'm asking a lot, Steele said, causing the frown to flicker to his friend's brow. Only do as much as you can bear. There are other ways to learn about Sovereign. A genuine smile came to Knox's face, and the friend Steele had known during high school returned completely. Knox had taken off his masks, and all that remained was just Templeton Knox, a friend of Reinhard Steele. Don't worry about me, Knox said honestly. I'll work it out. I know, Steele said as he got to his feet. Well, I'm going to have a look at the warehouse's location. Shall I tell a cute nurse you're ready for a sponge bath now? I'll call her, Knox laughed slightly, indicating to the remote on the bed by his hand. Hey, Reinhardt, thanks for coming by. Of course, Steele nodded and headed for the door. It's good to see you back in full health soon, Templeton. Knox called a farewell and Steele swiftly made his way along the corridors of the hospital and out the front doors. Outside, the rain had eased and the heavy clouds of the day were starting to drift away to the south, letting the setting sun cast its golden rays across Eden. There was still a light drizzle on the breeze and the washed buildings actually sparkled. The grime that had been washed from the streets and towers and what plant life grew throughout the city was green and refreshed. The brightness would soon leave the city though, and Steele enjoyed it while it lasted. The humidity had dropped with the declining light and the air felt pleasant for once. To the west the clouds glowed pink and orange and a rainbow could be seen through the tall buildings. Steele paused at the end of the covered entranceway and sniffed the air, his grey eyes looking skyward to appreciate the sunset beyond the imposing buildings that clawed at the heavens like a hungry beast. Eden's General Hospital was on the western side of Central, with the golden hills just to the north, away to Steele's right. Through the buildings he could see a few glimpses of the tree-covered hills, and the leaves of the plants sparkling like gold in the setting sun. His jaw firmed as he reminded of his ambitions to live in those hills one day, or somewhere similar, and with a deep breath he walked over to the taxis that were parked in the rank. Climbing into the first one in line, he instructed the driver to head to the East Point docks, and with little said the driver took off and Steele turned his gaze out the window with no intention of seeing the sights. The drive from the hospital to the docks and wharfs of East Point was long, and roadworks plagued the main traffic veins like ulcers. The roads were also busiest at this time of day, so it took over an hour and a half to reach his destination. During the journey, his mind was once again filled with contemplations about his meeting with Benedict, and once again the mirror was held before his eyes, making him feel unnerved. The fact alone was enough to annoy him, let alone the reason for his unease escaped him, which also filled him with irritation. He had had in his heart and mind set on living like Benedict since he decided to return to Eden, so why was he faltering now? Trying not to think about it, Steele pushed it from his mind and focused on what he was looking at out the window, just as the taxi pulled to a stop outside a well-known shopping complex near the docks and warehouses of East Point. After paying the driver, he hopped out of the car and looked about. The taxi took off swiftly enough, and Steele turned away from the complex of shops. It was dark now, and he was still a fair walk from the warehouse, but he did not mind the stroll, and it made more sense to ask the taxi driver to take him to the shops instead of the front of a private warehouse. The sun had set now, and the lights of the city were aflame. A soft rain still lingered on the breeze, but on the eastern side of the island the wind was minimal and the humidity remained. Steam wafted off the roads and footpaths, clinging to the shadows under the pedestrian overpasses and down the side alleys. To the north lay the fish markets built on the boardwalks that ran towards Junkyard Port, where thousands of boathouses were moored in the narrow channel of water between Eden and Folk's Isle, the only east side island of Eden. Among the Junkyard Port ran many wooden walkways that wound through the old boathouses and floating buildings, and the place was filled with the poorest in the city. In many ways it was the slums of Eden, and the rent on the boathouse was far less than renting a small apartment. Folk's Isle was known for its poor accommodation and low rent, as well as crime, drugs, and illegal immigration. It was Jimmy who controlled the Junkyard Port in Folk's Isle, but his domain ended at the fish markets that were run by Clara, a fact that Jimmy was known to dislike, for the daily markets of fresh seafood were a profitable event. Steele paused as he crossed the main road via the pedestrian overpass, his gaze going to the view through the buildings to the Junkyard Port, the clogged mess of boathouses bringing a frown to his face. The warehouse he was heading to was not far away, only a few more blocks, and sitting on the eastern shore of Eden. There were no sandy beaches on this side of the island. It was naught but rocks covered in barnacles and shipping ports lining the shore. No longer did tall buildings from housing stand along the streets, and in their place were warehouses, corner shops, and dingy bars. The known red light district was further to the north, near the Junkyard Port, where Jimmy ran the streets, but it was also known that there were a few brothels among the alleys as far south. These places of adult entertainment did not have affiliation with either Clara or Jimmy, because they sat on the border between the two associates' turf, and it was an area that was heavily disputed by the pair. Steele's warehouse destination was another of the disputed areas, and this particular one, Knox informed him, was owned by Deke Reuven. As he walked, Steele checked his phone, opening an application where he could store notes and where he had written one of the security codes for the complex. Steele also tapped his pocket, feeling the security card he and Knox had received from Reuven after Steele had insisted on having one. Reuven had not been too impressed with the request, but he handed over 2 security cards after Knox had promised another theatre collector's item. Pausing at the end of an alley, Steele looked across the road to the gated complex. Security looked rather tight, and he hoped Reuven would hold his promise that on the night of the deal, the gates would be left open, and all security guards and cameras would have gone and turned off. That was the biggest gamble in Steele's mind. They were trusting the word of Deke Reuven. The man could very easily keep the cameras on and send the footage to the police. But Steele could see that if the man did that, he would be implicating himself in illegal dealings as well. From this point of view, the warehouse looked like a legitimate import and export complex. The lights beyond the walls were bright and shining down the large buildings at the centre and to the many stacked shipping containers and crates. Through the bars and metal gates, Steele could see rows of trucks parked in the loading zones, ready for tomorrow's morning's deliveries. To the side, the overpass from the main road of Barakatan loomed overhead. The blue neon lights running its underbelly shone down on the houses below, and the sounds of tyres on bitumen echoed in the steamy air. The road in front of Steele, between him and the complex, was also busy. Cars drifted past, their headlights shining in his eyes and lighting up at the few pedestrians that were still wandering in the growing night. Grabbing the security card from his pocket, Steele left the cover of the shadowy alleyway and crossed the road, walking confidently up to the front gate where a bored-looking guard greeted him. "Can I help you, sir?" the man asked, his suspicions obvious. Without a word, Steele showed the man his card, bringing a frown to the guard's face before he took the card and scanned it at his covered station nearby. The main gate was divided into two parts, with the largest sliding gate taking up most of the space, and the smaller gate from the side for pedestrians. It was the side gate that opened and Steele stepped through when the guard handed him back his security guard. "Haven't you guys got anywhere else to inspect?" the guard asked dryly, catching Steele's attention. "What do you mean?" he asked with a slight frown. "Two other inspectors came by today. One this afternoon and the other a few minutes ago," the guard explained. "The woman is still here somewhere. Are they colleagues of yours?" "No," Steele shook his head, appearing unsurprised. "They must be from different companies." "I wasn't here earlier, but apparently the guy this afternoon was real dodgy," the security guard continued, appearing relaxed. "The woman just before, though, was real pretty." "Right," Steele nodded. "Well, I best get to it. I'll see you on the way out." "No notebook?" The guard raised an eyebrow curiously, stopping Steele before he moved off. "All digital these days," Steele replied, taking out his phone. "Yeah, fair enough." The man nodded and smirked. "I bet there'll be devices telling us when to take a dump soon. It's getting ridiculous, you ask me." "You're probably right." Steele faked a laugh and headed off into the complex, giving the guard a brief wave. "See me on your way out." The guard called after him and Steele waved over his shoulder. Steele did not really hear the man's words, his mind already wondering who else had come to supposedly inspect the complex. He could only conclude that the others were from the other parties to the deal. One would have been from Clara's group most likely, but as to the identity of the other imposter, he was not sure. Could they be the mole in the company, coming to do some reconnaissance for the police in preparation for the large-scale bust? The thought brought some excitement and trepidation to Steele's mind. Police involvement could help his plans if played right, but most likely they would greatly hinder the situation.